Welcome to the deep dive. You've brought us some really compelling source material today. These excerpts from Acontasuna Casa Spirita.pdf.
Yes, it's quite a text.
It really seems to pull back the curtain on the spiritual dynamics happening around a Spiritist center, a Casa Spirita, and the intense challenges faced by the people there.
That's right. What we've got here is a really detailed account, presented from a Spiritist viewpoint, of course. It talks about planned infiltration, basically,
Infiltration. By who?
by what the source calls malevolent spiritual entities. And it details their opposition and, importantly, the responses from both the benevolent spirits and the human workers involved.
Wow. Okay, so it sounds like it covers a lot, like ancient ideas of worship, but also these subtle, kind of unseen battles. Fought
Well,
where exactly?
Fought right in the realm of human emotions and thoughts. That's the battlefield described here.
Interesting.
So yeah, our mission today is to kind of unpack this source, pull out the key insights, really understand the challenges it's describing.
And explore the lessons, right? Lessons about what? Vigilance, charity,
Yeah,
spiritual growth, maybe.
exactly. Especially when facing that kind of adversity.
Okay, let's dive into this.
So the source material kicks off, interestingly, by giving us this historical backdrop. It talks about ancient temples, places of worship.
Yeah, I saw that. Like pagodas, Egyptian temples, the Acropolis, Delphi, Rome, the Temple of Jerusalem. Why start there, do you think?
Well, I think it's setting up a contrast. It mentions all these incredible, stone structures.
Very physical places.
Very physical. But then it makes the point that all of them, no matter how grand, are temporary. They decay. Uses that image of Chronos, time devouring them, or they get destroyed, like Jerusalem's temple.
Ah, okay, so the physical is fleeting.
Precisely. And that's contrasted then with Jesus' teaching, which the source brings up, that God is spirit, and worship should be in spirit and truth, not just in buildings.
So the location isn't the main thing.
Right. The source emphasizes Jesus finding his temple, like within himself, his sanctuary in nature, his altar in his consciousness, through prayer.
That shifts the focus quite a bit, doesn't it? From the outside to the inside.
It does. And that leads directly into how it describes the Casa Espirita. It's not just another building.
It's presented differently. How so?
It's called a workshop. A place consecrated to Spiritism, sure, but mainly a place for practical work with spiritual entities.
For what purpose?
The stated goal is general edification and the moral improvement of humanity. So it's framed as this active spiritual workplace.
And it sounds like working there isn't taken lightly. The source mentions some serious requirements.
Oh, yeah. It talks about necessity and responsibility, absolute seriousness, and this core combination: vigilance, prayer, study, and work. It's definitely not portrayed as, a casual hobby.
Okay, so that sets the stage for the institution itself. Now let's get into the conflict. These invisible adversaries.
Right, and the source draws on a concept from Allan Kardec's The Medium's book here. Basically, that just like good protective spirits can link up with groups, so can malevolent spirits, and they have strategies.
They don't just attack randomly.
No, according to this, they target strategically. It says they often link to the weakest members first
Why them?
to try and make them instruments, and then gradually involve the whole group. It's described as this insidious creeping process.
And the narrative names, so to speak, on the opposing side.
It does. It introduces the main antagonists as a group of obsessing spirits, led by someone called Julio Caesar.
Julio Caesar, like a Roman.
The name is used, yes. He's described as operating from this sinister city in a lower spiritual plane.
And his goal?
Very direct. The invasion, the dominion, and ultimately the destruction of this specific Spiritist center.
Why this center? What made it such a target?
Well, according to the source, it was simply its success.
Success in what?
In its work. Rescuing suffering spirits, providing real-world help, assisting the sick, promoting child welfare, giving out medicine. Their positive impact apparently drew this negative attention.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting for me, the how. The method of attack. It wasn't physical, right?
No, that's a crucial point in the source. Julio Caesar is explicit. No moving objects, no throwing stones, no assassinations.
So how did they plan to attack?
The plan was to act silently, occultly, in the field of feelings.
Feelings.
Yes. The strategy was all about suggestion. Suggesting negative thoughts, stimulating irritations, jealousy, gossip, indignation, touchiness, making people argue over roles and tasks.
Hmm.
Basically psychological and emotional warfare.
Wow, so they're exploiting human weaknesses.
Exactly. Leveraging the breaches left by many workers, as the source puts it, exploiting existing human inferiorities.
And why that method? Why not something more direct?
Well, the chilling reason given is that this subtle approach was the only way they could get past the center's spiritual protection.
Why is that?
Because the benevolent spirits, the protectors, couldn't violate the free will of human workers. They couldn't just block negative thoughts if the person was, receptive to them.
So the humans had to let it in, consciously or not.
In a way, yes. Their own internal state, their vigilance, or lack thereof, was the key. And the source actually frames this whole infiltration from a spiritual perspective as a necessary test for the workers and attendees.
A test. Okay. So with this subtle plan in place, the source then gets really specific about the targets, right? It shows the strategy playing out.
It does, yeah. It gives concrete examples for different people in different areas of the center's work.
Let's talk about Marcia Boaventura. She worked in fraternal care.
Yes. And the plan against her was deeply personal. They aimed to torment her, make her life a hell, specifically by influencing her husband, Boaventura.
How?
By exploiting his, what the source calls dense vibrations, his focus on material gain. They apparently misled him towards some luxurious temple, probably another church or group, that was actually controlled by these negative entities.
And encouraged him to donate money there.
Large amounts. The goal was twofold. Cause financial hardship for Marcia and him, making her life harder, and also stir up competition for her role at the center, among others, really trying to force her out.
That's intense. What about Maria Sousa in fluidotherapy? That's like spiritual healing with fluids.
Kind of, yeah. A form of energy healing in the Spiritist context. With her, they targeted a hidden desire.
Which was?
Her wanting to be seen as a great magnetizer, a powerful medium of cure. They planned to inflate her ego, basically. Feed her pedantry and vanity.
To what end?
To undermine her actual effectiveness, but also to create conflict, suspicion, and gossip within the healing group. Make her a disruptive force.
And the source mentioned some kind of deal.
Yeah, a manipulative tactic where the obsessors working with her would agree to temporarily stop bothering one of her patients just to make her think she was succeeding, building up her vanity for a bigger fall later, or for leverage.
Devious. Then there was Soraya Barreto, the medium, and Sergio Queiroz, the dialoguer.
Right, the ones involved in communication with the spirit world.
Their vulnerability was different.
Yes. The plan there, according to the source, was to exploit what it calls mutual sensual thoughts and inferior tendencies.
To push them into an affair.
Exactly. Aiming to stimulate an adulterous affair, cause a huge scandal, and basically lead them to abandon their spiritual work altogether out of shame or conflict.
So attacking personal relationships, ego, finances. What about the more intellectual side, the doctrine study? Israel was involved there.
Yes, he seemed to be a key figure in maintaining doctrinal clarity. The tactic there was more about disruption and confusion.
How so?
By introducing modismos, like fads, trendy but maybe outlandish spiritual communications, new concepts. The idea was to try and reformulate all the work, basically sow discord and confusion.
Cause arguments about the teachings.
Yeah, create great gossip and confrontation with Israel and the established leadership. And they specifically targeted Israel by suggesting his methods were old and outdated, hoping he'd get discouraged and retire.
Even the charity work wasn't safe. The beneficent promotions.
Nope. They targeted workers there too, especially any who felt maybe a bit sidelined from the more serious mediumistic or doctrinal tasks.
How did they target them?
By encouraging negativity jokes, turning into gossip, competition, envy, jealousy, creating a bad atmosphere that would drive other volunteers away, and just generally undermine the good work being done.
And even the music group, the choral group.
Yep, a specific tactic there too. Inspire more agitated music. Music that went against the center's preferred calming or uplifting style, aiming to cause irritation, especially for the conductor.
It seems incredibly widespread, not just the key people.
Absolutely. The source says hundreds of simple obsession processes were implanted in just general workers and attendees, anyone offering those breaches, those vulnerabilities.
Creating a chain reaction.
Exactly. To triple irritations, make everyone more on edge, and just generally open paths for wider negative influence throughout the whole place.
And finally, Castro, the president. How was he targeted?
Mostly through stress. The stress of managing all these problems, popping up the complaints, the scandals, the friction between workers.
Trying to wear him down.
Yeah, and also aiming to make him prioritize just organizational control, like managing the chaos, over the spirit of charity in the core mission, which in itself would open more breaches.
And that symbolic dream he had about the house with cracks.
The source presents that as a direct warning from the spiritual plane. The cracks weren't in the physical building, but fissures in the field of the spirit. Fendas da invigilancia humana, fissures of human invigilance. It powerfully underlines that the real vulnerability was internal.
Okay, so this really detailed, subtle, multi-pronged attack plan is laid out. But the story doesn't end there, right? The source talks about the response.
Exactly. It's not just about the attack. It's about the resistance and the response from both the benevolent spirits and the humans.
The spiritual guides, Antonio and Joanna, they knew what was happening.
Oh, yes. The source says they were fully aware, monitoring the infiltration.
But they didn't just step in and stop it because of free will.
Right. They respected free will, but they provided guidance and protection where possible. Their counsel constantly emphasized those core principles: vigilance, prayer, study, and work.
And cultivating positive qualities.
Definitely. Virtues like tolerance, patience, discretion, fraternity. And maintaining doctrinal purity was stressed, but, and this is important, handled with intimate patience and moral authority, not intolerance or creating more conflict.
So how did the humans start to turn the tide? Did their actions make a difference?
Absolutely. The narrative shows specific acts of charity and vigilance having a direct impact.
Like what?
Like Castro performing an act of personal financial charity for Marcia, the one whose husband was causing trouble. That act, combined with his own prayer and study of the gospel, is described as leading to the immediate departure of 5 obsessors who were specifically targeting him.
Wow, that's quite direct.
Isn't it? And then Marcia herself, her patience and resilience despite everything. Plus, Castro in Israel visiting her husband, Boaventura, when he ended up in the hospital.
They brought fluidotherapy and prayer.
Yes. And that act of compassion is shown as the start of Boaventura's own liberation from the negative influence and his eventual turnaround. He later gets involved in charitable work himself. It highlights the power of simple, sincere, good actions.
And the workers in general.
As they became more aware, maybe just feeling the negative pressure, they increased their collective prayers for the center. They held specific spiritual meetings focused on cleansing and strengthening the environment. And apparently it worked. The atmosphere improved.
Meanwhile, Israel kept the doctrine study going despite being targeted.
Yes, reinforcing that doctrinal foundation. And on the spiritual side, the guides, Antonio and Joanna, gathered reinforcements, what the source calls celestial militias, to bolster the spiritual defenses.
There was also that confrontation with Maria Souza, the healer who was getting influenced by vanity.
Right. Castro and Israel, apparently guided by their spiritual mentors, had a talk with her, calmly but firmly. They addressed her claims about doing spiritual surgery, urging prudence, telling her to remain anonymous, stick to the doctrine.
And they mentioned the legal risks, too, illegal practice of medicine.
They did, trying to ground her in reality. But despite the guidance, she ultimately chose to leave, influenced by the obsessor spirit Elvira.
Which sounds like a failure, but the source frames it differently.
Yeah, it frames her departure not just as a loss, but as part of the test for the center, an opportunity for the remaining group to grow in discernment and coherence.
And some areas resisted infiltration entirely, like the disobsession group.
Yes, that group focused on helping obsessed individuals reportedly block the infiltration attempts completely.
Why were they successful?
The source attributes it to the workers in that specific group being particularly idealistic and serious about their commitment, combined with strong protection from benevolent spirits. Their inner state, their dedication, acted as a shield.
So all this resistance, the charity, the prayer, the firmness, it led to a turning point.
A major one. The success of the good guys, basically, and the increased vigilance and virtue of the humans caused many of the obsessing spirits to just give up. They deserted Julio Cesar.
His operation fell apart.
His spiritual city is described as becoming practically empty.
And Julio Cesar himself faced consequences from his own side.
He did. He gets hauled before his superiors, described as 10 judges or 10 wise men, and basically chewed out for failing to destroy the center and losing so many followers. He's deemed incompetent, set to be replaced.
But he hadn't give up then.
No. In desperation, he rallies his last 400 followers for one final, all-out attack, trying to prove their worth, hold their positions.
And this leads to the climax, which involves a really surprising move from the spiritual leader, Antonio.
Totally surprising. Right as the final attack is launched, Antonio orders the center's spiritual defenses lowered. He says, suspend the isolating cords, open the fluidic doors, lower the protective currents, disconnect the magnetic apparatus, basically drop the shields.
That seems counterintuitive, dangerous.
Right, but then the source describes what happens. As the invaders rush into this apparently undefended space,
Hmm.
they're hit by something else.
What?
An indescribable magnetism, an overwhelming wave of energy from Antonio, the benevolent spirits, the malicious Celestas. It's not force, it's described more like overwhelming light and love. It paralyzes them.
So they weren't destroyed, they were overcome by good.
Exactly. Many flee in terror from this sheer power of love, basically. Others are just gently collected by spiritual rescue teams, profoundly moved by what they experienced. Gonçalves and Daniel, two of the attackers, are mentioned as being deeply affected. Elvira, too, shows signs of change.
I'm Julio Cesar.
Utterly defeated, left alone in his now empty, desolate spiritual city.
Wow. But the story doesn't stop with his defeat, does it? The aftermath is pretty remarkable, too.
Yeah, this part is really profound. It moves into recompensation, reincarnation,
Yeah.
even for the aggressors.
So Gonçalves, Daniel, Elvira, the ones who were attacking, what happened to them?
They're received by Antonio and his team, not with anger, but with love. They feel ashamed, naturally, but Antonio tells them there's no reason to be ashamed. He reframes it.
How?
He says the important thing now is the courage to recompose with good, the years dedicated to the practice of evil. They're offered new opportunities, including the chance to reincarnate, to live again in the physical world and make amends.
Then Julio Cesar, the main antagonist.
He's also found alone and defeated. And Antonio goes to him, and then comes this huge reveal.
There is it.
Antonio reveals that he was Julio Cesar's father in a past life.
Oh.
Yeah, and he tells him despite everything Julio Cesar did, despite his rebellion, he is loved, and he too will have the opportunity to recompose with good the evil you did to humanity.
And the source even maps out their future lives.
It gets incredibly specific. Antonio reveals Julio Cesar will reincarnate, and later, Elvira will come back as his wife.
The one who influenced Maria Souza.
That's the one. And Gonçalves and Daniel will return as their children.
So the whole group, the core attackers, will be reborn as a family.
Yes. And Antonio himself will be Julio Cesar's spiritual protector in that future life, guiding them all back towards the path of good, together.
That's quite a plan for redemption.
Isn't it? And Julio Cesar is told he'll have the blessing of mediumship in that life. Specifically, an affinity for helping obsessors, the kind of spirits he used to command.
So he can help them instead of leading them.
Exactly. And maybe the most stunning part. He's told he will eventually become the president of the same kind of spiritist center he tried to destroy, using his intelligence and administrative skills, honed over millennia perhaps, but now for good.
It really drives home that message from the source. No sheep will be lost.
And that justice walks hand in hand with divine mercy. It's a powerful statement about potential transformation, no matter how far someone has strayed.
Okay, so bringing it back to the center and the human workers, what were the final lessons drawn from all this? The place returned to normal.
Yeah, the source says it returned to heirs of fraternity and union, and Antonio, the spiritual guide, summarizes the key takeaways for the humans who went through it all.
And the absolute core defenses against this kind of infiltration were
Vigilance and charity. Antonio calls them the locks.
simple but powerful. And the attacks find their way in when?
When pride and vanity take over. When, as the source puts it so well, the I is ahead of the U.S. That's what creates the breaches, the openings.
And focusing on yourself, personalism leads to defeat.
Defeat before your own conscience, before divine laws. It hinders your ability to serve and progress spiritually.
So the preventative medicine is internal work.
Vencernos a nos mismos, conquering ourselves, overcoming our own pride, ego, negativity, aiming for the common good, living Christ's teachings through actions, not just talking about them.
And the value of the work itself?
Every act of helping someone, freeing a suffering soul, human or spirit, brings happiness and aligns with the divine plan. Value the Casa Espírita, the center, as a sacred temple, a workshop where order and fraternity must be maintained.
How do you maintain it?
By testifying to the gospel through working for good. And here's a key line. The more we erase ourselves, meaning diminish the ego's demands, the more we exalt goodness, and the closer we are to God and the stronger the protection.
And Antonio trusted the leaders, Castro and Israel, to carry this forward.
Yes, he reaffirmed his trust. Castro is the good administrator, the faithful steward. Israel for upholding doctrinal purity, but doing it without personalism or intolerance, being firm yet patient.
What a journey through this spiritual narrative from the source material. It really makes you think, doesn't it,
Mm.
about these unseen forces, maybe not just around institutions, but, closer at home in our own lives.
Absolutely. This deep dive paints such a complex picture of these dynamics, and it consistently links them not just to external things, but like fundamentally to our internal state.
That need for vigilance seems key.
Yeah, but vigilance, um, primarily within ourselves, right? It's addressing our own stuff, the pride, the vanity, jealousy, irritation, all those things the source mentioned.
And it suggests that living those positive principles, love, charity, tolerance, keeping things clear and honest, plus prayer and study that's not just nice behavior, it's actually depicted as like powerful spiritual defense.
Exactly. And it gives such a, well, remarkable perspective on conflict. Even the aggressors aren't just enemies to be beaten. They're seen as souls needing help, offered chances to change, to make amends, through divine mercy and the work of others.
The battle isn't won by crushing the opponent.
No, it seems it's won by transforming the environment through virtue, and maybe even helping the opponent transform too.
It's a really vivid reminder, I think, that maybe the biggest spiritual battles aren't won with, force, but with that quiet, steady strength of virtue, humility, forgiveness, creating a space inside and out where negativity just can't thrive.
Definitely. And maybe here's a final provocative thought, drawing straight from the source material. This whole intense, difficult infiltration was described as being permitted because it ultimately served as a test.
A test for the humans involved.
Yes, but more than that. The narrative suggests it was a way for what looked like evil to actually pave the way for a greater good, accelerating spiritual progress for everyone involved, the
Yeah.
attackers included.
Mm.
So what might that suggest about the challenges, the difficulties, maybe even the attacks you face in your own life? Could they hold hidden opportunities for growth, for learning, for maybe even facilitating a greater good, no matter how difficult they seem at the time?
That is definitely something to ponder. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.